evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while since we've sat down and had a proper yak with the camera. Sort of got a couple, well, one request, not a couple. I won't sit here and try and talk it up or anything, but a fella on the comments asked me to do a bit of a breakdown on my bike and the setup and what I did, you know, to cross the Simpson and what I carried, that sort of thing. So we're gonna have a bit of a beer and a bit of a barbecue. Got some pork ribs on the Weber there, going to be good. And we'll have a bit of a yak about the bike and a few other things. So firstly, you know, how's life, everyone? This is Axel Foley. He's my little Beverly Hills cop. He's been with me for a long time, this young fellow. He's the ripe young age of 12 and doing very well. Hates the motorbike, absolutely hates it, goes off his head. It's hilarious when I start the bike, but anyway, enough about him. Right, so where were we? How's life, everybody? Good. Alright, so hopefully life's going well for everyone. Life's going well for me. Working hard as always, because, you know, as you do, you gotta work if you want to be able to do these things and go riding and do all of that. You've got to work your ass off and put your money aside and use it to go riding. And so that's what I do. I go to work and then I go riding. And anyway, righto, so the bike. Okay, so what we have here, we have a 2020 Yamaha XTZ 690 Tenere, you know, or a T7. It started out, look, what I've done with this bike, it ultimately still is very stock. The engine, the ignition, you know, the chassis, the bodywork, even the clutch lever, brake lever, handlebars, they're all completely stock. I've changed the foot pegs. I've just put RHK YZ450 foot pegs on there. I've got steg pegs which help with the bike when I'm going up hills and dunes and things like that. It allows me to grab with my legs a bit more and takes a bit of pressure off my hands, which allows the front end to work a bit better and a bit happier with the bike. We have a Camel ADV 5.5 litre rear tank. We have a Serbia's 23.5 litre, they call them a 23, but it's 23.5 litre front tank, and they're linked through the normal Camel vacuum feed on the breather line. You just run your breather from the rear tank to the charcoal filter and the outlet from the rear tank to the breather port, and I had to drill on your service, but I'll show you that later. Righto, so what else have we done? We'll put a centre stand on it, the genuine Yamaha one. Somebody once said it was built like a bridge, and they're right, like it's copped a beating and it still works just fine. People say, oh, you don't want one of them, it'll hook up and, you know, all that shit. And look, I've had no problems with it. So each to his own. To me, with the setup I'm running, when this is full of fuel, this thing's 250 kilos. Right? I don't want to have to stuff around with little crutch legs and stuff like that. I want to be able to get that rear wheel up off the ground, or very easily lean it back and have the front wheel off the ground so that I can change tyres or, you know, fix a flat, do whatever I got to do, and do it on my own, because, you know, the vast majority of my riding is done solo. You know, sadly, it's just the way it is though. Okay, the other things I've done, right, OEM crash bars, they work pretty good. You know, plenty of people run without them. It's, you know, once again, anything I've done it because I wanted to, because I was building my dream bike. I'm not saying that people should do what I've done. It's entirely up to you. We've got Ride ADV solo rear racks, and they're fantastic. They came from Greg Yeager from Ride ADV, a gentleman in Sydney hand makes them. Greg supplies them, and they have just been as strong as. I've got plenty of weight through them. The paint on them has gone a little bit, just on a couple of welds, but you know, that's to be expected. I'm tying things down to it, stuff like that. It mounts where the passenger pegs go. It's been a little bit of a struggle to mount the Camel ADV tank, the left-hand Ride ADV rack, and the steg peg and get the bolts back in. There was a little bit of manipulation involved, because things are starting to push the limit of where they're actually supposed to sit. So as a result, I've had a little tiny bit of rubbing from the Camel ADV tank on the actual chain guard, but who cares? You know, that gets scratched up by stuff anyway. I've got a DID XW Gold Star, I think it's called, or whatever, but XW 530 for chain. Just JT sprockets. I painted the rear sprocket myself. I run a Yamaha chain guide. You can get much cheaper ones than that now, and they work just as good. I put R&G covers on it. Some people say you don't need them. You know, once again, it's entirely up to you. For me, I find they're just an extra layer of protection for sharp rocks, stuff like that. You never know, you know, you can hit things, and any sort of bit of help does help. And so far it's worked pretty good. Got the trusty B&B bash plate. This thing is absolutely awesome. Aircraft alloy or whatever it is. Strong as, doesn't vibrate, doesn't make noise. I had to modify it slightly. I'll show you a bit later, but it's got just a cutaway in it with an extra bit of checker plate alloy welded into it, and that's because I run MT07 headers that eliminate the catalytic converter but still have the port for the oxygen sensor, and they just sit a little tiny bit lower than your standard headers on the 2020s, and so the B&B was designed for the standard headers. That's why I've had to cut it a little bit. Other than that, you know, it wasn't an issue. We mated that to a Camel ADV high link or high mount that's got the rally, the curved exhaust. I'll carry the camera around and show you that shortly. And then I've got a Black Widow muffler. Now the Black Widow muffler was an absolute bargain, so was the Dominator headers. The Camel ADV high mount, it is an extremely high quality product, and you pay for it. Alright, but the reality is, if you're going to go out by yourself, don't stuff around when it comes to your bike. You know, put the good stuff on it where it needs it, because the last thing you want is a crushed up link pipe or something rubbing against the swing arm or whatever when you've got the bike into trouble and you're a long way from anyone else. So put the good stuff on where it's necessary. Don't waste money where it's not. Okay, as I said earlier, I've got standard handlebars. They've worked very well for me. I just rolled them forward a little bit. I've got this service tank, and then I've got a Bagster leather tank cover, which was actually made for a stock tank, and it's got a really nice bag that clips on it. But the bag, if I clip it on with this, it interferes with the steering, so I had to actually remove the mounting, like the lock points for the bag from the front of the tank for clearance for the steering. But I like the bag, and I feel it insulates the fuel a little bit, that sort of thing, and it just adds a nice touch to the bike. I run Barkbuster handguards, standard fare. Got double take mirrors. I really like these. They're super clear and don't vibrate, and apparently unbreakable. I haven't given them any massive hits, but I haven't given them any damage or anything. I've got an MSC RM3 steering damper on the front. Now, when I use that, I've got it set up on 10 clicks harder than the softest setting, and that was after talking to MSC and just playing around with it. And basically I can't feel it most of the time. The only time you really it comes into play is when you get that front end grabbed by a rut, or you get a big hit you didn't expect, and when you're moving, you know, this is a lot of weight, and you want it to push itself straight or track straight as much as possible, and only turn or get offline when you choose to make it do that. Otherwise it becomes quite a scary motorcycle off-road. So I put that in there as a safety feature, and I'm very satisfied with the product. It's a fit, set it up and leave it alone type thing. Other than that, I've got Camel ADV anti-bobblehead on the dash. They work really, really well. They keep the dash from shaking around. You get a good, clear, non-vibrating dash picture, and I feel that that'll just help with the stress and fatigue on plastic over time. I haven't mounted anything above the dash. I just don't really feel the need to. But anyway, I've got a couple of rear whistles Got a Touratech headlight protector. That thing's fantastic, but it's got gaps in it, unlike the Perspex one. So I run it's like a headlight protective film over my headlights as well. I've got a steady 6-inch light bar with ADV engineering mounts. Now, a fella called Chris makes these, an Australian fella, and that's his sticker over here, ADV engineering. And he makes all this stuff and gets it machine cut and designed, and it just fits perfect the first time, every time. And it was wonderful. Now, to mount the spotlight, I've also got that, that's actually set up so that it's perfectly legal. So it works with the high beam only, but it can also be switched off, so I can use the high beam without it. So it's ADR compliant. It took a bit of dicking around to do it. There was a video by, I think they're called Mary Valley dirt bike riders, but a fella on YouTube called Josh, and he like deciphered something from some overseas guy who'd worked out how to do the relay, right? And doing the relay and wiring it up, it's very important to do it the right way, because you can do a lot of damage to the ECU if you get it wrong, because it's not, you know, your standard sort of headlight with a regulator rectifier, and you can just crack into the headlight like the high beam power wire, because you'll just cause carnage. So look into that. And then I've got a Denali switch up here for the, you know, for the isolation switch, which I did negative switching. Now, one of the things I do use is, and I found this from testing, is I use a marine relay, and on the relay I've got it a flyback diode, and once again that video from MVBDR will describe that for you. So thanks to the fellow Josh, or whatever his name is, that sorted that out. He done a good job with that. Okay, so what else have we done? Right, now the juicy stuff. Okay, I've got a Rally Raid open cartridge Gen 2 kit in the front end, and that is just mint. I love it, absolutely love it. It's what it does is straight away it pulls out all of the, from my very limited understanding of how suspension sort of works, we gutted all of the stock suspension, and what we did was we put a full kit inside, which runs one leg as compression and one leg as rebound, which immediately allows like better valving control through the fork legs, because each leg is doing an individual job instead of trying to do two jobs. And I only know that because I watched a video from the guy that makes them at Rally Raid. But anyway, Clive Ward from Motorcycle Biz in Raymond Terrace, he installed them and tuned them up for me on his suspension dyno. And then he put a K-Tech spring, I think it's an 8.5 kilo spring or an 8 kilo spring in the rear end, up from the 6 kilo spring. And then he revalved it for me, and we set it up for some reasonably aggressive riding. I mean, at least by my standards. I'm only an old trail hack, but I like to get into it, and I like to sort of launch it a bit and hit rocks and logs, and not big monster things like, you know, some of the other YouTubers and that, but, you know, I do like to ride it quick, and I like to trust it. So, tyres I run, I really like Motos Desert HTs. And heaps of people carry on, they say, oh, the front end walks around and all that. And look, to a degree it does, but it's a super aggressive knobby tyre. The reality is, on bitumen, if you've got great big long sharp knobs, the bike is going to walk. It's just the way it is, and you ride accordingly. And I would rather ride steady on the bitumen and be able to get stuck into it off-road, and trust that when I get onto those twin Brembos hard, that bike is going to bite in and pull up. And that's really important with a big bike. You need to be able to trust what's going on with the brakes and the front end and the grip. And the other thing is being such a big bike, I think one of the biggest mistakes most people make when they're, at least in my opinion, when they're riding them off-road, is they're trying to compromise too much when it comes to tyres. And this thing's a monster, you know, like, let's not kid ourselves. I am not Poltaris, neither are you. if you're watching this, you're trying to sort of learn a bit about it, or you're interested, or you ride already and you already know what I'm talking about. So, you know, but what you want is you want a bike when it's this kind of weight that you have to fight as little as possible. Okay, so if you can maximise your grip for a start, you know, on snotty trails, on you know, hard pack gravel, all of that, and have the best tyres for the best situation, then straight away that's one tick in the box that you don't have to think about or worry about when you're riding that bike. Now the next thing that's absolutely crucial is keep your brakes in good order. Alright, and so I service my brakes regularly, and by service, I've just got a home bleeding kit, and I just bleed the brakes regularly, and when it needs pads I put pads in it, I clean it with contact cleaner after I've washed it, and it stops like an absolute animal. They're totally standard, the brakes. I've just gone for sintered pads in the rear and sintered pads now in the front, because I eventually wore the front pads out at 15,000 Ks. Well, they probably had another 2,000 or 3,000 in them, but I wanted new ones in for the Simpson. Now for the Simpson, I replaced my front wheel bearings, my rear wheel bearings. I inspected all of my swing arm and linkage bearings and re-greased them all before I went anywhere. One of the things that I did when I first got the T7 was I opened up the head stem and I packed the head stem bearings, because they don't have a lot of lubrication in them when you first get the bike, and it can cause premature wear inside the headstock due to lack of grease. It's a big bike, it's got a lot of weight, and if you're riding out bush, that's a lot of impact going through those bearings, so you want to give it the best chance you can. Now, one of the other things I've got is the one-piece high rally seat, and I really like that. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world for me, but I'm a skinny bugger, so I've got to move around a bit to stay comfortable on longer sort of transport sections. But I do like the fact that when I do sort of sit down and ride, I can get fairly far forward even with this big tank, because it's a bit higher up in here, and it allows me to put a bit more weight over the front wheel. So, you know, it's not that you ever want to try, when it's set up like this anyway, motocrossing this bike, like, you know, putting your leg forward and trying to burn it around corner like that. It doesn't respond well to that. What you want to be doing is standing up with your legs sort of here and your weight, you know, kind of all your flexibility through your hips, travelling over this part of the bike, because the bike steers on the rear wheel. And the thing about these big adventure bikes that I think a lot of people are getting confused, or maybe getting the wrong idea about them, and rushing into buying a big adventure bike, and then is they are so much bigger than the person riding them and so much heavier that the only way to ride them and get the bike to respond correctly off-road is through correct riding technique. And I'm going to say it straight, because plenty of other people, you know, sugarcoat things, and I'm not prepared to do that, because I don't want people wasting their money or getting hurt. If you have no off-road experience and you are considering buying a big ass Tenere or something and going and riding the Simpson, don't. Simple as that. Alright? Think about this logically. This bike currently, with that tank full, and just these saddlebags, with everything else that I've bolted onto it, is very, very close to 250 kilos. That is a quarter of a tonne. Now the average big guy weighs 100 kilos. So this thing's 2.5 times heavier than the average big tough guy. Alright, and if you start wrestling this bike through inexperience, you will lose every time. I mean, even with, you know, years of trail experience, I can't wrestle this bike at all. So what I do is I ride it until I'm tired, and then I stop, and then I go again when I'm not tired. And I use technique, not brute force. So that involves, you know, weighting pegs correctly, using throttle and clutch application, correct throttle and clutch application. And the only way to learn that is get on something small and spend a year or two thrashing it out, scrub. Alright, come off it, crash it, climb hills, stall it, get it hot, do all of that stuff, and learn that inherent feel for an off-road bike before you tackle a big one, and that way you won't get disappointed and it won't end up parked in the shed. Alright, having a beer by the way. We'll check these. Oh, they're looking alright. Give them a bit longer, but pull. Alright, so what did I carry on the Simpson? Okay, we'll start with the basics. We got water. Alright, now these are Roto Packs mounts. Now one of the beauties of these Ride ADV racks is if I take these ADV Works bags off, which have been absolutely fantastic, they're as tough as nails and they are completely waterproof. It's as simple as that. I use an extra strap around them, but that's just because I'm paranoid about vibration, and the thing is, if you can keep things from moving at all, then it doesn't increase movement and it doesn't break stuff. And so far that theory works for me, but if I remove them, which isn't difficult to do, I can bolt these to the racks, and then these Roto Packs, that one's got heat shielding on it, it's just under bonnet, carb bonnet stuff, but these bolt on using the Roto Pack system, and that's how I carried most of my water on the Simpson. So these are, what are these, 1 gallon, so 3.8 litres each. And then I had a 3 litre Camelback in my backpack, and I also carried, hang on, undo the valve, it's all a little bit slippery because it's currently having a bath in WD-40, just to keep the corrosion down. We'll talk about that one day if I ever do it. But yeah, alright. So that didn't come with me, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But that did. So, sleeping arrangements. I took a Cedar Summit Spark 2 sleeping bag, and that worked really well. That's all I'll say about that. That's cool. That thing was awesome. To get water out of the Roto Packs, to save me from removing these all the time, I just took a brand spanking new siphon hose, and that just slid it straight in, and you just siphoned it out into your water bottle, and it worked perfectly. Hello little mate. Your little mate's back. Alright. Food. I took, for main meals, these dehydrated or freeze-dried, whatever they're called, backcountry cuisine meals. They were really good, but they do use a lot of water, so you have to allow for that. There's another one, spaghetti bolognese. Okay, carried a different set of gloves, didn't need them. I usually keep a set of gloves in there anyway. Now, I also took a liner for that Spark 2 sleeping bag, and this thing's excellent. It's only thin, but it's incredibly warm. Alright, now, this is very important. Another litre of water, so 3.8, 3.8, so it's 7.6, 8.6, plus my 3 litre Camelback, which actually holds a little bit more, but we'll call it 3 litres for the record. That was 11.6 litres of water. Now, this is a genuine Australian Army issue Cups canteen with a hexamethylene stove. So when I say hexamethylene, it uses a little solid fuel tablet. You just light it underneath with your water in there and it boils your water. And so all I'd do is I'd siphon a cup of water, because that was just the right amount, boil it up, open this, pour it in, close it back up, let it do its thing, and then there was a hot meal that was nourishing, had plenty of hydration about it, and plenty of carbohydrates and stuff you need. This was also good for making a barocca, a coffee, but that was my only cooking apparatus out there. So they're awesome. Alright, so the other thing that I keep in this particular saddlebag at all times, I have a brand spanking new rear tube. I Alright, now I use the 3mm ultra heavy duty tubes, I don't use the 4. And then I run, generally speaking, off-road about 26 PSI. If I know I'm going to do extended on-road, I'll put 30 to 32 front and rear. But if I'm off-road or mixing it up on both, I'll do 26 PSI front and rear. And I also carry a brand spanking new front tube at all times. Alright, just mandatory stuff, guys. Know how to use them. If you don't know how to change a tube, learn how to do it. There's plenty of videos on YouTube. Alright, so that's the contents of the left-hand bag. Obviously I had a little bit more food jammed in there, but that's the basics of what I carry. Right, let's just turn these lovely, lovely pork ribs before they burn to hell. Oh, this is going to be awesome. Alright, so I'll come to the other side, but I'll bring it all around here. So on the right hand side of the bike, I tend to carry the heavier stuff on the right, so it balances out the weight on the subframe against the camel tank when it's full. And you know, look, I don't run around very often with empty tanks. I keep the bike full of fuel whenever it leaves the shed. Okay, two most important things as far as repair items you will ever carry. A bag of 6 to 8 inch long cable ties, good quality ones, not cheapo ones. You want good quality UV resistant ones. And some serious V8 supercar Tarzan grip, you know, rated hardcore tape that'll just hold bikes together, literally. That stuff's awesome. Alright, and if you never use any of this stuff, then you've had a good run. Okay, the next thing I use is I've got a high quality Moto Pressor air compressor, and I keep that, you know, as close to in brand new condition as I can. And I plug that in. I've got a little port hidden here it's just a solar panel, like 12 volt port, and I use that, and that's directly off the battery. The rest of my electrics run through a thing called a heel tech. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I do that because that needs the amperage and the draw that only coming off directly off the battery, you know, can achieve. And you don't want to plug it into the cigarette ports over there, because that's only a little tiny low draw, you know, I think it's 2 amp plug or a 5 amp plug, and you can very easily overload it. So let's have another sip. And then you've got to stuff around changing fuses and that. Just save that for charging a phone slowly if you have to. Alright, so something I carry. Not everybody will carry something like this, but I do. Okay, this is an ELM 327. Basically, what do they call them? An OBD2 reader. Alright, so this plugs into the motorcycle. I've got a Yamaha adapter plug I had to buy for it as well. This was very, very cheap on eBay. It was about $37, and then the cable was about 50 bucks. And that plugs in under the seat. Now the reason I've got that is if you get stuck in a deep water crossing and you do get a bit of water go down the pipe and it touches the O2 sensor, what it can do is it can set off an engine code light. So once you've cleared any water out of the pipe and you've gone for a good ride and made sure the bike's doing the right thing, right, what you do is you plug this in, and then you use an application on your phone, and you can actually read what the fault code is, and if it's nothing serious you can clear it and get rid of that light. That's why I carry that. If you do not know what you are doing at all, I strongly recommend you stay away from this sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not going to recommend people start playing around with the ECUs and things, or the fault codes on their new motorcycles, because you've got warranties for a reason. And you know, most dealers, as long as you're looking after your bike, you know, properly, you're washing it after a ride, you know, you're getting it serviced when it's supposed to be, or servicing it yourself regularly if you've got the right qualifications, or you know what you're doing and you can you know, get an agreement with the dealership where they're happy for you to change your oil and do all of that. You know, you don't want to mess around with the electronic sides on this bike, right? It's a good simple package. Yamaha put a lot of R&D into making sure this bike was just absolutely bomb-proof, reliable wise. And I've seen them where the dash is shorted out, and only one of them, and it's shorted out due to a seal that had been pinched in the factory when it was being built, a brand new one, and it slowly drew in condensation and filled it up with water, and eventually it got enough water in it that when it fell over one day, the dash stopped working. And that bike did not miss a heartbeat. My mate's bike that it was, we did another couple of 100 kilometres that day, and that bike was perfectly reliable. You could turn it on and off, start it, ride it. You could sort of figure out if the ABS was working or not. But even if it is, and you can't turn it off, it's not a big problem because you can still get home. And that's what makes the Tenere such a great bike, is it's very, very simple. Okay, so I put a black case down there. This is one of the tool things now. I probably carry more tools than I need, but I like to be able to help other riders if I see them as well on different types of bikes. This is just an Aldi socket set, little 1/4-inch drive set, and it's fantastic. It's got Torx bits, it's got screwdrivers, you know, everything up to a 14mm. It's a great handy piece of gear. Okay, cool. Now, what else we got hidden away in here? Now, all of this stuff came with me across the Simpson. Another thing I carry is just a little container, and it's just got a mix of bolts and nuts and, you know, that sort of thing that match up to some of the bolts and that on the bike, just in case things vibrate out. Like, I always use medium strength Loctite on everything, but you know, when you're doing long distance outback Australia riding, things do vibrate out, so don't be shy to use a bit of that, you know, medium strength Loctite on stuff. Another thing I carry is a small shovel. Now, I would never bother with this on a small enduro, or like on an enduro bike. I just wouldn't do it. Now, apart from its value when you're actually camping and all of that sort of thing, one of the joys of having something like this is when you get this big bastard bog, it gives you something to dig with. Alright, and you don't want to have to sit there just trying to dig through red clay with your bare hands when this thing's stuck to the axles, and it can be the difference between you getting that motorcycle out or not. Now, another thing it can be good for is just smoothing out the edge of riverbanks. Also, it can be good for chopping away vines, stuff like that. Okay, now, tools. Now, once again, I carry probably heavier tools and more than I need. So we'll start with a 27mm reasonable quality Tool Pro ring spanner for the rear axle nut. Right, and I like a ring spanner, not an open ender, because you just don't want to round the nuts on the bike. Okay, another thing, obviously we carry some spare wire, fuses, a little bit of electrical tape, a little bit of grease in there. There's also tube repair kits, you know, spare valves, stuff like that. Just basic sort of gear. I should get an angle grinder and cut this down, but that matches the front axle, and if I lose it, it's cheap. I've got some good socket ones as well, but that's the one I like to carry out bush. Good quality side cutters, can't go astray with them. Spring puller for the side stands or the exhaust if you need it. Right, just a piece of wire with a hook on it, but this can be a very handy tool. Couple of different screwdrivers, even though you've got them in that set, having these to do whatever can be handy. Lock wire. Alright, if your grips start moving around or whatever, but especially if your grips lose their stickiness with their glue, this can save the day and save the ride and be the difference between your grips being shit for the whole ride. Alright, you just tie them up a bit tight with these, and yeah, fantastic. I've got these Park Tools tyre levers. I've had these for a lot of years. and I bought them from a motorcycle shop. Can't even remember where, but I've never ever seen another set. But I find these, like, I work really well with these. Some people prefer Motion Pro ones or other brands. These work well for me. Although I've got Allen keys once again in that socket set, I also carry a good quality King Chrome ball-ended long arm Allen key set, alright, because you don't want to strip stuff as your work zone, you know, 1/4 inch drive wears out. What else do we got? Okay, so your assortment of spanners. Now the spanners I carry obviously are only spanners that fit this bike. You can't carry stuff for everything. I carry a magnet, okay, and a good extended one, and that's in case you drop a bolt down in the engine bay or something, you can't reach it with your hands, you just stick that in there and you can, you know, you find it. As I said before, bit of medium strength thread locker. Other than that, you know, you sort of laugh, and I carry a shifter, although I try and avoid using it at all costs, because shifters do damage to alloy and magnesium fittings. It's an emergency tool, that's it. Righto, we got all that. Drop that back there where it's supposed to go. I'll clean all this shit up after the video. Okay, so now to add to the fuel capacity of the bike, right, I used 2 of these ADV Works 5 litre fuel bladders and 1 Giant Loop 11 litre. Now, in saying that, right, now I had them in another bag, which the bag I used was I'll grab it, hang on. Alright, so the bag I used was a Nelson Rig, you know, I don't know how many litres, but just roll up dry bag, and it fitted the 11 litre and 1 5 litre inside of it once they were full, and then I had that across the back seat and tied down with straps. Excuse me. And then I had another 5 litre which was under the straps tied down. Now, so in saying all of that, the next time I do it, I will only carry this 5 litre and this 11 litre. The other one for me was unnecessary, you know, and probably in the extreme. Because of the fuel capacity between these 2 large tanks, this bike had a lot of fuel left over, you know, like there's 28 litres of fuel, or 28.5 to 29 litres of fuel on it as it is, and with another 21.6 litres of fuel, it was just, I couldn't go through it all. So I came in with this, with, you know, 2 blocks missing on the fuel gauge, so it had at least, you know, 14 litres left in the main tank. So anyway, but they worked fantastic. Both brands were excellent. You know, they cost a bloody fortune, but like I said, anything good, you know, you got to pay the dollars for. All right, cool. So the other things we used were a Garmin Zumo XT GPS with a hardwired mount, and this is fantastic. You know, start the bike, it turns on, and it kept pointing me in the right direction. It had to have the track I was following for the whole trip downloaded onto it, but after that it was very, very easy to follow and very reliable. I found that to be no issue whatsoever. It worked in light rain, no problem at all. I've got a Uniden 5, I think it's a 5 hertz or whatever, but it's the more powerful UHF handset. Now that's not connected to the bike at all, but the battery in that's really good, and because you're not turning it on and leaving it on all day, you only turn it on when you need it, that lasts a week easily. Anyway, so now powering all of that, I've also got Oxford heated grips on it, which are bloody fantastic. But powering all of this, as I said, I've got a Heeltech, what's called a Heeltech Thunderbox, and that's a little control module unit that's got a positive and a negative that you connect to your battery, and then it's got an outlet with a whole heap of fast connector positive and negatives, right? And what what it does is it prevents any of all this electrical equipment that I've added to the bike, including that spotlight, from actually activating until that little heel tech box senses a stable voltage going into the main battery. All right, which is a fantastic thing to do, because you'll start the bike up, and you know, alternators and that sort of spike a little bit until they settle down. And once they settle down, they then produce a good voltage, which isn't putting stress on all of the electrical system, and so that just stops it from doing any of that. But what it also does is it prevents any electrical drain from the accessories that I've put on when that bike's turned off. So when the bike's off, nothing gets past that heel tech. So yeah, guys, that's the bike. One of the things, okay, so some of the things I do a bit different. I carry less fuel and more water. Alright, I found that the 11.6 litres of water was literally just enough, and I had arguably some of the best conditions you could have in the Simpson Desert. You know, the hottest I saw was 37, and that was only pretty briefly, all things considered, probably about 3 or 4 hours of it. You know, I got a very light rain, either on me or ahead of me both nights that I slept there. And most days it was about 31 and the sand was reasonably firm, so I was able to keep up a pretty consistent pace where I wasn't going through monstrous amounts of water. If the sand had been hot and soft and chopped up, it would have been a very, very, very different story, and you could have very easily gone through an extra 5 litres of water. And I'm talking for a solo unsupported on a bike this big, because that's the thing to remember is you know, if you really want to do the Simo or something smart, you do it on something light, and you try and minimise your time in the desert, because that means the less time you're in the desert, the less supplies you have to carry. You always carry enough to be safe, but you know, if you can confidently, for argument's sake, you're a Simpson legend, if you can confidently cross that desert in 12 hours, well then you take your camelback, a spare 1 litre bottle of water, little bit of emergency tucker, and you know, maybe a couple of tubes, and you go for it. If you're like me that had never been out to the Simpson before, you're on a huge bike, it's a big challenge, and anything could happen. I carried enough stuff for up to 4 days, I thought. So I would like to have, just to make it more comfortable, an extra 5 litres of water, 5 litres less fuel. The other thing I've done is I've bought a blow-up mattress to go with that, because I found my hips got very sore on the hard ground just sleeping in the sleeping bag. But other than that, I wouldn't change the setup at all. The bike was bloody fantastic. The trip was amazing, and what can I say? Can't wait to do it again, and I hope you guys are all enjoying the channel. So here we are. Thank you very much. Johnny B and the Big T7. Send it solo. Be good, guys.